My name is DebColon. I live in the Washington metropolitan area, specifically in Reston, Virginia. What I'd like to do today is demonstrate the buyer-focused sales process, give you a nice overview. At the conclusion of my overview, you'll be able to better understand how customers go about making purchasing decisions, and more importantly, you as a salesperson can establish a roadmap and a process to help your customers move forward in making some of these difficult purchases. I'd like to start by asking all of you a question. How many of you have recently purchased a car from a dealership and traded in an existing car? Okay, Mary, is it okay if I use you in this example? I'm going to show you that the buyer-focused sales process is not only repeatable, it's a predictable sales process. You'll see that customers go about making purchasing decisions the same way over and over again. I'm going to ask Mary a series of questions to illustrate this very point. Mary, can you tell me the type of car you had purchased that you traded in? Okay, it was a 1995 Saab. Can you tell me why you purchased this car? Okay. It had good gas mileage. It was sporty. And it was within your budget? Okay. Now, Mary, when you think back as to why you traded it in, why did you trade this particular car in? Okay, you started having some service issues. What specifically started going wrong? Okay, you had to replace the motor. Your brakes went out. And what else, Mary? Okay. So you were spending too much money. Okay, when you think back, Mary, how long ago was this? Okay, it was a couple of years ago. Now, when you think about what your requirements were for your next purchase, can you share with me what your criteria was? Okay, you wanted something sporty. Okay, you wanted a 4-door this time. Loaded. And good gas mileage again. Okay. Now, what were some of the cars that you looked at that met this criteria? So you looked at a BMW, the 3 Series. You looked at also a Lexus 350. And what else did you look at, Mary? Okay, another Saab. So Mary, what did you end up purchasing? Great, the BMW 3 Series. How do you like it? You love it? Okay, great. Now, how many of you have ever had buyer's remorse? Okay, there's a show of hands. Now, how does buyer's remorse feel? It's not a very good feeling. What do you attribute buyer's remorse to? John? Okay. You attribute it to not doing enough research. How many of you felt like you paid too much? Okay. How many of you never really thought through what the intention was from what you had purchased? Okay, I see a show of hands and some heads nodding. So would you agree that this is how we go about making purchasing decisions over and over again? Okay, we go from not having needs initially, things happen. Things don't stay the same all the time. We then, after we realize that, you know what, things aren't quite right, I'm spending a lot of money, and what we typically do is we put our situation on a scale. And if we perceive that it's worthwhile to take action, in other words, if we see our situation is bad enough and the cost outweighs the value, okay, or your current situation, you have a very good chance of being a candidate to take some sort of action, okay? Now, what we're going to do is focus on the center part of the buyer focus model, and this illustrates what's going on in the buyer's mind. And you'll see as I go through this inner circle that it relates to the very things that I asked Mary in her car purchase. Back when Mary purchased the 1995 Saab, she would be what we would consider an unaware buyer, meaning that someone who just made a purchase isn't typically in the market to make another purchase. We move from the unaware stage to what we call the aware stage because things don't typically stay the same. So Mary went from the unaware stage to the aware stage because some of these things started occurring. She started having some service problems. She had to replace the motor, which was very expensive. She had, her brakes went out, which also needed replacing. And she saw that her situation was really costing her a lot of money. Okay. How many of you attempt to put Band-Aids on a situation? Okay, we all have. And then you get to the point where you realize this is not getting any better. I'm starting to deplete my funds. And you really start to think through, you know what, it's really time to move forward. So you move from the unaware stage to the aware stage where these things started occurring. And we move to yet another stage called the consider stage. This is once again where we put our situation on a scale. These are the issues and concerns. Okay, this is how much it's costing me. And just because someone has needs doesn't always translate into action. Okay? So you'll see when we start talking about the seller and some of the skills that you'll be learning, you'll see that this is a critical point. This is where we determine whether or not you're dealing with what we call a prospect or a suspect. Okay, we're going to talk about what those differences are. After the customer considers, and of course Mary's was a yes, that I'm going to consider alternatives to my current situation, you then move into what we call the preference stage. Preferences are synonymous with purchasing criteria. Okay, in Mary's situation, she wanted something that was sporty, that was 4 doors this time, that was loaded, and also good gas mileage. Okay, and so that's what we call the preferences. After you establish preferences or requirements, we go about shopping. In her situation, she went to BMW, she went to Lexus, she went back to Saab, and after you shop, you move into what we call the buy stage. That's where you actually make a purchase. In her particular case, she purchased the BMW, okay, and she loves it. When you think about some of the times where, like we talked about, having buyer's remorse, you'll see that sometimes that's not always a pleasant experience. How many of you have ever purchased a car that you wish you hadn't? Okay, I know I have. And how does that feel? Not very good. Okay. Now, when you think about it, when you do have that buyer's remorse, would you agree that you learn from that particular experience? Okay, we hope to. So, when you make your next purchase of an automobile, do you go about making that purchase differently? Okay, I see some heads nodding. Okay. So, purchasing criteria, there's a lot that goes into that. Okay, we're going to talk about that as we talk about some of the seller activities. After we establish preferences, we shop. After we shop, we purchase, and then of course we have that review stage as I mentioned earlier. Okay, so do we make repeatable, predictable process? What I'd like to do now